Okay, good morning. Last people coming in, we're just going to start this session. I hope you have the right session. Income, family, and changing values in the income stream today, the second session. We have a very strong panel for this session, so we'll go ahead and get started because we have to finish right on time today because we only have 1 hour for lunch. So we'll try to get a start here right away. I've also been asked to mention those of you who need to clear your financial issues, those of you who have reimbursements, please do them immediately after the session. I'll just briefly introduce the moderator, and then the moderator will introduce the other members of the panel. My name's Peter Morrison, by the way, from HelpAge International, and our moderator is Thelma Kay. Probably most of you have already met her or know her. She's the former chief of the Social Development Division of UNSCAP, and she has been a long friend and supporter of HelpAge, and we've worked closely together over the years. And she now works as an advisor and mentor and others, consultant to governments and other parties on aging. So we're very happy to have her with such long experience on aging in the region, and I'll let her introduce other members of the panel. So.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everybody. I see a lot of very familiar faces and new faces in the audience. I hear we have a very tight schedule because we have to end in 1 hour. Because lunch is going to be only 1 hour, yeah. So let's get moving. First of all, I will introduce this session, and after which I will introduce our very distinguished presenter and discussants. And then there will be a Q&A session. I'll take 3 questions at a time. Okay, having said that, let me move on with introducing this session. This session is very interesting because it's on income, family, and changing values based on the NTA that was presented in the earlier session. So this actually goes deeper into the earlier session and also complements it. So as we all know, we're all here today because we know that demographic trends present a very clear challenge. But on the other hand, the economic impacts have always been seen as very negative, and older persons are seen as a burden in spite of our big efforts, including the last conference of HelpAge, where we tried to focus on the issue of older persons as resource and not burden. So a very important issue, though, is that older persons are seen as a drain on resources. And this is why this particular conference is focusing on economic growth and equity and sustainability, which I think are very much interlinked. So older persons have traditionally been seen as dependent on support from their children, but the picture is actually, as we all know, more complex and nuanced nuanced at the country level. And sometimes, as we will see in the presentation, income flows are in the other direction, called reverse intergenerational transfers. So this session is going to concentrate on the nature of the family and the NTA. Now, as we all know, the nature of family is changing very rapidly due to demographic, social, and economic changes. Fertility has declined. Family sizes are smaller, and in this region, migration has resulted in dispersed and scattered family. And of course, longevity is changing the age profile at the household level. So therefore, this session will draw on National Transfer Accounts, NTA. For those who are not at the earlier session, of course, NTA quantifies how age groups acquire and use economic resources. Professor Ogawa will, of course, go deeper into that. And also, we will look at how changing values and family structures are affecting the household income. And also, I think there'll be a very interesting part here that will show how has policy changes impacted on the family structure and function. For example, when the Japanese subsidy for long-term care was shifted from the institutional setting to a home care setting. Well, I should not be telling you the story, but I was so struck by it because when that happened, the women of the household, many of them had to sort of quit their jobs because they wanted to use a subsidy, and then Professor Ogawa saw a decline in their attitude towards looking after their parents. This whole attitude towards filial piety came down. They didn't think that they wanted to look after the older folks, and I'm not surprised. I would feel that way too. So anyway, there was this very important implication of policy and how it can impact social values and family values. And also, I think we are going to look at the different composition of the different expenditures on the different age groups. But just a very quick example from Singapore. In Singapore, where I come from, government is focusing a lot on the younger generation. And this is because this is seen as having not so much as eventually a social safety net, but as I think one of my very distinguished former finance minister said, this is a trampoline effect. That means the government will provide some support for those who are falling below the safety net, and with the support, they will bounce up again. And of course, then they will become future producers, be able to look after themselves and the family in later life. Very interesting concept indeed. But having said that, I shouldn't. There are a lot of very distinguished academics waiting to tell you what is more about what I'm going to say. But okay, so the issue today is how is demographic transition affecting family structures and social values, and how does this impact on intergenerational transfers, and then very importantly, what are the policy steps that low and middle income countries of Asia can take, and what are the key recommendations for our governments. So having said that, I will now briefly introduce the three of them at one shot, and then we will go on with it. Professor Hiro Ogawa is a very old friend of mine. He's now currently professor at the Graduate School of Economics at the University of Tokyo. And I'm very pleased to also inform you that only in the last 2 days, he has assumed the position of chairholder at the Social Security Center at the University of Malaya. So my friends from Malaysia, you'll be pleased to hear that. Professor Ogawa actually needs no introduction. He has written very extensively on population and development in Japan and other Asian countries, and his research interests have always been on the socioeconomic impacts of low fertility and rapid population aging. In fact, we met a long time ago when we were both in the population division of SCAP. So this is how really knowledgeable he is on population aging. He's covered the different aspects of population aging, and his very recent work includes measuring, not that recent, but his very well-known work now includes measuring intergenerational transfers. So our two distinguished discussants here, I use the word distinguished unreservedly. There's Professor John Pickett. He's director of the Australian Research Council Center of Excellence in Population Aging Research at the University of New South Wales, Australia, where he is the professor of economics. Dr. Pickett also has a very long-standing interest. His interest is in retirement and pension economics and finance. He has worked with the government on tax review panels and also on ministerial advisory committees, and has a lot of international experience to governments, consulting to governments like Russia, Indonesia, and also a professor in China and the US. Very, very distinguished professor. And last but not least is Professor John Modell, who is another very household name. Is a research professor emeritus at the Population Studies Center, University of Michigan, and also the international affiliate at the College of Population Studies at Thailand's Harvard, Chulalongkorn University. Okay, during the last 2 decades, Professor Modell has focused on issues relating to older aged populations, focusing on older persons in Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. And he's currently working on long-term care of older persons and also the children left behind by migrants from Myanmar. So as you can see, we have assembled a very distinguished panel, and I must congratulate HelpAge for getting all these distinguished people together. So without any further ado, let me call on Professor Naohiro Ogawa to give his presentation. Hiro, please.
Well, in the previous session in this room, Sanyap Lee made a very clear presentation regarding the national transfer account and its usefulness and the limitations. So I'm going to use the same framework. I mean, based on the NTA, I would like to talk about this aging issues, particularly in Japan, because I try to avoid the duplications with what the Sanyap Lee has already presented. So in order to avoid that, I have to somehow my focus was sort of concentrated on my country to a considerable extent. But I hope the discussion will expand the scope of my presentation by referring to some Asian countries. And okay, once you join the National Transfer Account program, right now there are 51 full member countries in the world. You have to estimate country's most important graph. This is Japan's most important graph, estimated using the 2009 round of data. And horizontally, we have age here, and here's the monetary unit. The blue one it shows the age-specific profile of labor income, and the green one shows the age-specific profile of consumption. But consumption has 2 components, private and public consumptions. And once you have this most important graph, then I would like to move to the next graph called the life cycle deficit graph. This is a deficit because children don't have much income, and then elderly don't have much income either, so they have deficit, but the middle working age population have surplus. So these deficits go down this way, and surplus go down this way. Then how are we going to finance these 2 deficit groups? Well, by using this the public and private transfers, or if that's not enough, they use their own savings. It's called asset-based reallocations. And this is actually, in this graph, I want to show you the change in the most important graph in Japan over the last 25 years. This is 1984, this is 89, 94, 99, 2004, and by the way, before I go any further, let me point out one thing. Here, I want to call the attention to this particular spot. All this time, the age profile of consumption is fairly flat, just like any other Asian countries, because the elderly tend to live with the families. So the family members provide unpaid care services. Well, Japan was a similar situation up to that point, but after year 2000, government of Japan established this long-term care insurance. That cost of the elderly person went up quite a bit because those internalized services became the part of the GDP. So it just expanded quite a bit. And 2009, it's like this. By using these pieces of information, I compiled the changing the life cycle deficit graph in Japan. And then this is 1984 graph. This is a real picture. And here, that at age 15, the children actually have a 2 million yen deficit. This deficit has to be financed by parents. Green one means parents, family. And blue one means the government. And then the elderly get family support, and also the government, a pension, and medical care services. Also, they have their own assets. Dark blue means their own money, assets. But it's interesting that the elderly tend to start getting support from the government at age like 60. But elderly start getting family support from 64 back in 1984. But 25 years later, situation changed dramatically. It's hard to believe, but this is what happened. Everything just grew quite a bit. This is real term, in real terms. So cost of children, cost of elderly went up quite a bit. Also, the surplus increased. And what's surprising to me is that here, the elders are getting pension or government support system starting from age 63. Used to be 60, but it's 63. So over the 25 years, this pensionable age was shifted by only 3 years. But this is really shocking. Elders started getting support from the family from age 81. So the Japanese elderly are quite independent up to age 81. And on top of that, here's negative family transfers. This means the elderly in Japan are quite wealthy, so they just give resources back to children. And this is called recurring equivalence kind of situation. And then in Japan, the elderly are playing the role of society safety net, particularly since the bursting of bubble economy in the early 1990s. The Japanese economy has been really slowing down, really in a bad shape since the early 1990s. And unemployment rate went up quite a bit. But public pensions are a highly dependable source of income for the elderly. So the employment for the middle-aged sons and daughters have problems. So they start giving money to their children. That's the reason why we have negative transfer. But if you look at the intra-household transfer pattern, these are the transfer givers, and this is the transfer receivers, and then this age group of 15 to 29 gives this much to the children, or the younger ones, 0 to 14. How about others? Go this way, this way, this way, like this. It's interesting. If you look at this graph carefully, you find something interesting. That is this age group. There's no arrow going to this age group, going out. This means elderly person, oops, what am I doing? Here, they just give. I mean, the other age groups keep on receiving these things. So, in other words, they're quite wealthy. They get the pension, fairly good pension, because the Japanese pension system is quite mature. So the per capita benefit is quite all right. So that's the reason why they give money to the younger cohorts or even the older ones. And then, how about other Asian countries having a similar situation? This is the life cycle deficit pattern for various countries in Asia, not only in Asia, but some the European countries. But Japan, as I said earlier, have this negative transfer. But there's another country, which is Korea. Korea has a negative transfer. In other words, Korea started having the fairly strong social security system starting from late 1980s and 1990s, expanded quite a bit. That's the reason why they have a similar situation to Japan. But probably the elderly in Japan are quite wealthy. I mean, they have quite a bit of a wealth. But the problem is that according to the OECD, Japanese elderly person, Japanese population in general, I think, according to OECD, 57% of Japanese adults have no knowledge of financial products in general. They have assets, but they don't know how to spend the functions of each financial product. And so financial education is urgently needed because of the Japanese elderly person, many of them have a senile demented problems. And in Japan, total population shrinking, but if you look at the population, centenarians, the size of the population of centenarians has been growing at annual rate of 13%, 13% a year since 1963. Back in 1963, we have only 153 centenarians, but we have more than 60,000 centenarians. It's growing so fast. So according to the estimates, by year 2050, probably we have about 2 million, the centenarians amounting to about 2 million. So if that's the case, who's really going to finance them? And so the government, came up with this new law. It's 2007 financial instruments. So governments require each bank to come up with their own strategies to make sure that the elderly persons aware of what they're signing for with the bank. For instance, when they purchase the whatchamacallit trust funds. So one of the banks like this, one of the major banks does not sell risk instruments to the customers over 80 and over unless they can demonstrate sufficient knowledge of investing or accompanied by the other family members at the time of purchase, like this. So each bank has different strategies to make sure that these elderly persons know what they're doing. So higher financial literacy is likely to is good. If the government promotes this the financial literacy the program, then we found something positive. According to the national survey which I conducted, those in the 30s and 40s and 50s, if they have good knowledge on financial functions, financial literacy, then they are more motivated. They're willing to invest themselves for strengthening their human capital. So the financial resources and the human capital are highly connected. So once you promote the financial literacy, then the Japanese human capital probably will be greater. It will be increasing in years to come, which is probably good for the economy to boost the economy. But the Japanese government, yesterday morning, the Japanese doctor made a presentation about the Japanese government problems financing the medical care programs. And particularly in 1972, the government of Japan had this free medical care services for the elderly persons 70 plus. But they abolished that in 10 years later because they had a financial crisis. So in 1980s, government of Japan started shifting responsibility back to the families. And problem is that the Japanese family system has been deteriorating around that time. This is a graph. It is back in 1955. This, by the way, there are 3,300 dots here. That means 3,300 administrative units. For each administrative unit, I calculated this index, the women 40 to 59 divided by the elderly person. This means how many caregivers would the elderly person have. I'm not saying that the women should stay home and take care of them, but this is actually based on the reality in 1955. And then look at this. I mean, most of the districts have green, the green color. That means it's okay. They have more than 2 caregivers per the elderly persons. But 2000, we have some red ones. 2025. Even worse. In one of the cases here, the worst case is right here, somewhere in here. There are only 4 caregivers for 100 elder persons. If that's the case, how can the government of Japan retain or keep on administering long-term care insurance? In Japan, long-term care insurance is administered by district. Each district has its own program. If you have this, limited, this dramatic change in the demographic, the power, sources, then how can they retain the long-term care insurances? So the family system, family support has been deteriorating. Not only that, value has been changing quite abruptly. According to the survey, but by the way, this is the only graph in the entire world available. And this newspaper, Mainichi newspaper, has been asking the same question, using the same wording to the respondent, to the women of reproductive age below age 50. Okay, the first question is that, are you going to rely on children for old age? Here, back in 1950, Japan was still recovering from the World War II. 2/3 of mothers said, yes, I'm going to rely on children for my old age. But after 1961, it's going down quite fast because of the establishment of the the Social Security system, and it's almost linearly declining. This is quite predictable. Now I know it's going to keep on going down, but we ask another question to the same respondents. Okay, how about looking after the parents? And then 80% of the Japanese women said that yes, it's a good custom or natural duty, and then all of a sudden went down. When I got this result, I thought I made a big mistake in wording the questionnaire. No, the wording was exactly the same. The sampling was exactly the same frame. Same. But this is the real change. The reason is this. After the 1986 government, tried to introduce in-home care because the government of Japan didn't have money for financing the medical care costs. So they started shifting these hospitalized persons back to the families. And then, of course, Japanese women, I mean, they're caregivers, basically, didn't like it. So the respondents start showing the real feelings. So it started going down. So as a result, the proportion of the elderly person living with the children has been falling down quite a bit. And then, that's the one thing. This is dramatic change. The government trying to shift the responsibility back to families, but the family didn't respond, didn't like it. So the government has to come up with their own policy, which is long-term care insurance. Starting from year 2000, they didn't have any choice but starting this long-term care insurance. So in other words, the responsibility of taking care of the elderly sort of bounced backward the government to the family, family to the government, like that. But, okay, we've been talking about the national transfer account, but there's some limitations. These are the problems. Like first one says it's expressed on measured in terms of the average persons rather than the variability within the group. And also gender is sort of left out. Time is not counted. And also the worst one is the construction policy-oriented simulation model. That's the most difficult one. NTA is so powerful in terms of describing or showing you what has happened. But what's going to happen in the future, that is one of the weaknesses. That's what we're working on it. So, for instance, this graph, suppose here's a pensionable age. If the pensionable age is postponed or raised, then what's going to happen? Well, the elderly maybe reduce the consumption, or maybe when they're younger, they might work a little harder, or maybe they might reduce the monetary gift to the grandchildren, like this. But this is sort of an average. Within the same age group, for instance, age like 55, there's a considerable variance depending on the education, the residence, and also the past career history, and so on and so forth. So what we do is that individuals responsive to these policy changes vary considerably depending on his or her characteristics, such as health, education, wealth, family, organizations, and also their responses change over time. So to address these issues, we got support from the government of Japan, fairly large grant, and using this, based on this, using this grant, we trying to address these issues. We're trying to, what I'm doing? Whoa, never mind. Okay. But anyway, we're trying to go back to the very, okay, that's okay. Cannot. Okay, what I'm saying is that so we introduced this national transfer account, but at the same time we decided to conduct this the longitudinal survey on individual survey for the elderly persons. We're trying to link this macro NTA framework with the micro level approach. In fact, there are 20 countries in the world having NTA and this HRS type of survey. And that's the reason, well, this is exactly what the government of Japan is interested. We got this big grant. This is the only grant available given in the field of social sciences. So in the next 4 years, we have to work on this, this particular issue. But at the same time, unfortunately, I mishandled this PowerPoint, but the Korean case, I think Samuel Plee calculated the figure for me, but there's this most important graph, the life cycle difference pattern, but once you incorporate time transfers, situation changes dramatically. The elders started giving a lot of time to children, and the grandchildren. Also, I was shocked when I look at this. The children, like age 0 to 3, get some money from the parents, but time is so huge. So in other words, when you analyze the intergenerational transfers, money is not everything. We have to pay attention to time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiro, for covering so much in such a short time. Well, I'm sure all of us benefited from that presentation, even though it's how to make a very complicated concept understandable to us all. Thank you very much. I think I myself have learned a lot about, I wouldn't try to summarize, just a thing that struck me. Of course, how Korea and Japan, with their strong social security systems, have led to reversed intergenerational transfer. And I like the linkage to dementia eventually, with so many countries now having people of a ripe old age, this dementia. I think countries that really have to think about legal protection for their older persons. I think in my country, Singapore, we're in the process of enacting legislation for vulnerable persons, covering the elderly and the disabled. And I also like the wonderful analysis and the policy implications you have drawn from the NTA. So I'm not the discussant, so I shall pass it on to Professor John Pickett.
This one, right? This one. Yes, okay. That's right. That's all you need to do. Just the one slide. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Thorma. Ogawa-san, that was terrific. Thank you very much. It was a very good presentation. Fascinating story in Japan. Whether Japan is actually the sort of harbinger of what is to come in many other countries, I'm not sure. I think what's characteristic, what distinguishes Japan from some of its Asian neighbors, is a very well-developed and relatively generous social security system. And so there's a flow in to the elderly. When I was talking to Ogawa-san yesterday, he said, well, actually the elderly provide some social insurance for the whole family. And I think some of that is occurring. He didn't actually say that this morning, so I'm adding it to his presentation, because I think that's a genuine insight. And it is something that we observe in some other countries. For example, in Brazil, where the old age pension system is very generous and very criticized, something that is not always taken into account is that there is evidence that it supports the education of children and grandchildren. Right? If you take South Africa, there is a means-tested age pension in South Africa which works so that pretty much the black population gets it and the white population doesn't. Right? And a lot of analysis early on suggested that this pension discouraged labor force participation. But more sophisticated analysis showed that what it did was provide a stake so that young workers could leave that household and seek other work. So once again, there was a transfer of resources and potential from old generations to younger generations. And I think if we were looking for a universal human impulse, it would be that older people want to help their children and their grandchildren as much as possible. After the global financial crisis in the US, the AARP, which is an association representing retired people in the US, went out to its membership and said, what can we do? And the membership overwhelmingly came back and said, do something for our kids, do something for the employment opportunities of our kids. Right? So I think that's a very strong underlying truth in much of this intergenerational transfers that we observe, that there is this very strong primeval force to support future generations as much as possible. So that's the first point I wanted to make, that what's happening here is this generous social security system permits that. And that came through, I think, very strongly in Ogawa-san's slides. The second point I wanted to make was the link between filial piety, if that's the phrase that's used in Japan, and migration. I think that if you go back as far as the Industrial Revolution and pre-Industrial Revolution, there was very strong support. Filial piety in some sense existed in European economies as well, European cultures as well, but the scattering of generations spatially tends to break that down. Now, I think this can be overplayed. If you look at what happens to elder care, even in a country like Australia, which is a developed country and which is a Western country, by and large, elders, the support elders get come from their families. But it's not universal, it can't be completely relied upon, and it is less complete than you would hope, so that there's some erosion, right? Less is given than before. Women are now working full-time in the labour force, much more so than before. Time, another issue that Ogawa-san raised, time is much scarcer for these groups in these working years with both children and elders. And so for that reason, there's more support that's needed from government. The only mechanisms for moving resources between generations of family and government. So that's the second point I wanted to make, that there is this need for public support. As Ogawa-san said, this is a crunch time, because the process of demographic transition means that there is less resource available from the public sector than before. All governments are looking to try to confine their transfers to the older segments of the population as much as they can, right? And the reason for that is that there are more and more older people, and it's becoming more and more expensive, and the only way to finance that in a sustainable way is through increases in distortionary taxes. So that's a crush, and so the push then is towards self-provision. And that leads to my final point, and the final point is around financial literacy. So financial literacy, I think, is one piece of the puzzle to encourage greater self-provision. Right? But I don't think it can do it on its own. I don't think it's enough to do it on its own. I think you need to look at incentives. I think you need to look at defaults and nudges. I think you need to look at peer pressure and peer influence. And then you need to look at information, like financial literacy, and you put it all together, and then over time, right, there may well be a change so that people look further into the future than they currently do. This is more of a problem in Western economies than it appears to be in some Asian economies, where saving is far higher. But a lot of that saving appears to be for education, going back to my first point around transfers to the young, less about self-provision for one's own retirement. The analogy I sometimes use is that of attitudes towards smoking. So in Western countries at least, and to some extent in Asian economies, Asian nations as well, there's been a great move away from smoking behavior. Smoking rates have gone down a lot. How did that happen? Well, we had high taxes on tobacco and cigarettes, and we had huge information campaigns and marketing campaigns about how bad smoking was. And we had nudges. We took down, we forbade advertising at sports grounds about tobacco. All these things combined led to peer pressure against smoking at dinner table and so forth. And eventually you got a big change. I think it's that very comprehensive approach to changes in behavior that you really need in order to get people to think carefully about what they need in retirement early enough in life to make it count. So they're the 3 points that I think I really wanted to make. I just wanted to refer to this chart, which actually has been invented by a colleague of mine, Peter MacDonald, who is a professor of demography at the University of Melbourne. And what it does is it looks at the needs of older people and then the potential providers. And you can see that on the right-hand side there, we're looking at government provision, and then we go to sort of something like non-government organizations, and then family, and then self-provision. And I think what we are going to observe, and the other thing to note is that we think of needs of the elderly as some sort of a generic conglomerate, but actually they're quite differentiated. These needs are very different. They occur at different times in an elder's lifespan, between active retirement and frail retirement. And I think it's quite useful to think about what the sources of the needs are and what the needs themselves are. I think what we're gradually observing is that per capita, right, there is going to be a move toward the left of that chart from the right. Right? In aggregate, that won't happen because populations are aging, and that is the tension which, I guess, crystallizes the challenges of population aging. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for making those very clear and very incisive points. Thank you. I'll now move on to Professor John Modell for his comments. That was perfect timing. My timer just rang. Yeah, right.
Just one, two, next slide. Get back, and we have
12:30. 12:30. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we have time.
Well, I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to have very insightful comments about the presentation, but at least I'll have a few comments that hopefully will be of interest. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Ogawa for a very illuminating presentation on Japan based on the NTA methodology. My aim is to encourage broadening the discussion to include not just Japan, but also the lower and middle income countries of Southeast and East Asia. So we'll have hopefully a broader discussion. The discussion, of course, should focus on the topic of this session, income, family, and changing values in relation to older persons in a general sense, and hopefully not only on comparisons with Japan. I'd like to see a much broader discussion following this presentation. Some issues to consider when assessing future prospects for older persons in ASEAN, the ASEAN group of 10 countries. First of all, will higher incomes of adult children associated with increased education and the employment that they get as a result of that compensate for the smaller sibship sizes, the smaller family sizes, in relation to financial support to aging parents? This is some data from Myanmar, where I've been responsible for a survey of older persons, and this shows indeed that higher education is associated with a higher likelihood that some sort of monetary support will be provided to parents. This is, of course, $8 isn't very much, but this is $8 or more. But we can see a very clear association between education of children and the probability that they'll provide monetary support to their parents. Some issues to consider when assessing the future prospects for older persons in ASEAN are: will increasing government retirement and welfare benefits crowd out continued filial support from children, of course? And here's some evidence from Thailand. In Thailand, they have an old age allowance which was originally only for people who were poor, but then in 2009 they made it universal. And we can see here that, in fact, making it universal didn't really affect the amount of money that children were giving to their parents. You can see here between 2007 and 2011, 2009, of course, is in the middle, that there was virtually no change in the percent that gave 10,000 baht, at least, to their parents, and likewise the percentage that gave even more amounts actually increased, and that continued to do so more recently based on the 2014 survey of older persons. So it doesn't seem as if by giving an old age allowance, which is fairly modest, by the way, that it crowded out to filial support. Additional issues to consider when assessing the future prospects for older persons include: will improving health of older persons enable them to work longer and support themselves? will having fewer or no children permit future elderly to accumulate greater wealth for own support in old age. As most of you know, fertility has gone down quite a bit in Thailand, and people that are now entering the older ages are having smaller families, and that will continue for some time, given that fertility now is below replacement level. And finally, what options are available for families and communities and the state to deal with the decreased probability that no adult children are nearby when long-term personal care is needed. Of course, material support doesn't require proximity of children. It can be sent through remittances or brought home and visits and so forth. Social support, well, person to person requires proximity, but with more migration of children, they're not nearby. But with the virtual universal provision of or acquiring of mobile phones, it's very easy for children now to communicate with their parents. And I speak to taxi drivers all the time who are usually from the provinces, and they always tell me that they call their parents very frequently. A few caveats when considering what the future holds for older persons in the region. The decline in family size will take longest to affect the oldest group for whom personal care is most needed. That provides time, more time to plan for these persons who are most in need. Future elderly will differ from today's elderly. They're going to be better educated and in better health. Hence, they'll be better able to live independently. Future elderly and their families will also be living in a very different environment, both economically, socially, politically, and technologically. I mean, just think of the technological change in the last couple of decades with the advent of mobile phones, permitting correspondence between migrant children and their parents. That was not possible before. Parents and their adult children are likely to exercise human agency to adapt to the changing circumstances in ways that will minimize negative impacts and hopefully maximize potential benefits. In brief, there are several open questions that bear on the future situation of older persons in the Ossian region, and we, of course, don't have answers to them yet, but it'll be very interesting to see how those answers evolve. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So I'm sure all of you have been given a lot of food for thought. I will now open the floor for questions. I will take 3 in one round, and your questions can be directed to anyone on the panel or for all members of the panel. So who would like to start the ball rolling? Let me recognize 1, 2. Okay, we have. Okay, Matthew. Is that Matthew? Yeah.
I'm from India. This question is to Professor Ogawa. In your curve, you showed surpluses being built by older people in their lifetime. But what is happening in India is the bulk of the people do not make any surplus at all, because most people in their working life have less than 100 days of employment. So what happens to them in old age? Because when there's no surpluses to cover the deficit. And this is true about 90% of India's population, elderly population. So.
Hi, good morning. I'm Aura Sevilla from Coalition of Services of the Elderly. Actually, the presentation that presented is not different from the situation from the Philippines, where family support is really declining. Our constitution clearly says that it's the duty of the family to take care of its older members. But because of demographic changes, structural changes per se, the morbidity and then the migration challenges this now. So in the situation now that the Philippines is #1 exporter of care laborers, particularly nurses, what happens now is, so in the average, in every 4 older persons, there at least one child working abroad. So what happens is that, ironically, they are going outside of the country taking care of other older persons, but no one is taking care of their own older persons in their own family. So, and international labor is not without a cost. Older persons are considered surrogate parents of overseas Filipino workers. They provide 92% of older persons in the Philippines take care of at least one grandchild, and they spend around 44 hours a week taking care of their grandchildren. So we're speaking about filial piety. So my question would be, do you think that if the government would provide universal pensions, could this mean like institutionalizing also the filial piety? I mean, that government is also giving back to what older persons has done and continue to contribute. So, and then also to address the declining family support. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I see one more at the back. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm Lakshman Dissanayake from the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. Now, population is not homogeneous because they are disaggregated by gender, income levels, urban, rural settings, etc. But what we have seen here from Professor Ogawa's presentation is the general picture of the Japanese population. Were you able to analyze these differences and come up with different pictures for each category or subgroups of population? Thank you.
Who would like to respond first? Mm-hmm. No, I take 3 at a time, yeah? Save the next 3 for the next round. Before
the Indian situation, you mean the surplus is small? Is that your question? I mean, you're saying that the surplus component is much smaller in it? Well, then if that's the case, the National Transfer Account that deals with the flow of resources. So you have to, if you want to finance them, I think you need some kind of stock component to make the both ends meet. So NTA, I mean, we don't have this information about the stock. We just pay attention to only flow. So I don't know the Indian situation. Maybe you might have some stock, which could be, which can generate some income for these people who need more additional resources. And then about this, the foreign, going to the foreign countries in the Philippine case, it's interesting that in NTA, in the case of Philippines, they go to foreign countries, but they bring them income back to their own countries. So in the Philippine, the labor income profile includes those who income earned in foreign countries. But in the case of the Mexico, that's different. They go to the United States, make some money, but they don't come back home. They send the money back to the Mexico. It's called the transfer, familiar transfer from the foreign country. So it's a transfer in the case of Mexico. It's a labor income in the case of Philippines. So depending on the country, the intergenerational international transfer pattern, the NTA has a different treatment. But I tend to agree with you, though. I mean, in the case of Japan, that we definitely need more caregivers from Asian countries, for sure. And the only major problem we have is that the language. We want the Japanese-speaking caregivers, but nobody really speaks Japanese language in Asian region. I mean, even entire world, Japan is the only country where the Japanese language is spoken. So that's one of the problems that we have, and the government trying to require these foreign workers to pass the national test, which is in Japanese language, which is very, very difficult for the foreign workers to pass. So these are the things that, but the government in Japan trying to change the regulations, because our case is so serious. We're trying to use robotic services, but that's not enough to take care of the elderly persons. So I think we have to open our country. Basically, I think Japan should open the door to the foreign workers. But that's a big issue in our country. And according to the survey, there's still, last 20 years, only 33% of the people in Japan feel it's acceptable to have the foreign people living in their own communities. So Japanese people still quite conservative about having foreigners living in the country. So that's maybe the major problem. But I think the speed of aging so fast, we're forced to change very quickly.
So if I understand the point about the Philippines, the idea was, well, if we gave more money to the elderly, right, would this help everyone? And I think, provided we know where the money is coming from, if the money comes from the sky to give more money to the elderly, then yes, my belief is that that money will filter down through the generations pretty readily in most countries. I don't think that's something that is specific to Asia. I think it's just a completely general impulse that those kinds of transfers will occur where they can, in much the same way that bequest motives are very strong in most communities. My reservation is that money doesn't come out of the sky. Money comes from tax dollars, and often these tax dollars are paid by workers who are relatively poor. And so I think once again, there's a tension between how generous you make transfers to the elderly and how much you're prepared to tax poor workers, or tax workers in general, but among them poor workers, to finance that. So the big challenge that I think all countries face through the 21st century as demographic transition follows the Japanese leadership in this is that a question of fiscal sustainability. And it's in response to that challenge that we see more and more emphasis on self-provision. And so I think without knowing the details of the Philippines situation, I imagine that that's the tension which exists.
Okay, let me have the next round of questions. I see several hands. 1, 2, yes, I've kept you waiting, and one from the back. I'll start with gentleman in black, and then, yes. Most gentlemen are in black, but this one, yes.
Now, subject is income. Income is an active. I'm Kemraz, working from Nepal, looking in HelpAge. So, subject is the income, and income is active working age. The discussion dilemma in here is that life expectancy is increased. The retirement is 60. There is a question, shall we stop there or extend the retirement age so they can work more? If they can work more, then new generation will not get the employment. If they stop working there, then there is less income. So what should be your opinion on this? Whether we go for a more active working age or start a new paradigm of working for the older people, then the new generation will get new employment opportunities.
We'll collect 3 questions first. The gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Sang Hyuk Lee. I have one question for Hiroga. Actually, I want to talk more about the policy. Actually, the Japanese government spent trillions of yen for like an angel, new angel plan, so many plans and long-term care. You must have some impact evaluation study, right? What are these impacts? And you probably know what are the mistakes they made. There are many, but whether these are good policies. So, can you actually tell us some story about this, about the policy evaluation in our Japanese government programs?
Third question from somebody at the back. Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm from Thailand, working for HelpAge. I actually have an observation when you look at the presentation of Professor Ogawa in terms of different sources of support from older person. You will see that the public transfer is quite huge and it's kind of a concern. And as a person coming from Thailand, then you will see another charge in comparison. The public transfer nearly like a nil if you compare to the private transfer and also the assets. But at the same time, we hear a lot about, because of looking at other countries where public transfer is quite huge and concern. And then in Thailand, I think, referring to the discussion this morning, the government in the process of trying to contain or retain the proportion. So I think, when we look at other countries, which it had, has a problem, but it actually probably had to strike balance between, different sources of support. When it's still very, very tiny, and we think we have to contain it, probably have to see how the balance between different kinds of sources. That's just an observation that sometimes we are so frightened about other countries and then try to contain our spending. But we are at the different stages. So not really a question, but kind of observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Usa. Wait, there are three. So John wanted to respond to one.
So let me respond to the first question down here. I think it's a very common way of thinking that if you have old people working longer, there are less opportunities for the young. But it's a fallacy. It's just not a correct way of thinking about the way an economy works. An economy is not like a crate where you've got to remove one bottle before there's room for another bottle to go in. It's like a balloon which blows up and down. And many, many studies have shown a positive association between later life employment and youth employment. I think Pip referred to this yesterday in his talk. So I think the idea, it's a famous fallacy. It even has a name. It's called the lump of labor fallacy. And it's been around for a century or more, documented in the literature, but there is no evidence whatsoever to support that idea, right? If anything, older workers and a more vibrant economy that comes from a more productive or a more participatory, mature labor force population, a mature population, right, gives the economy additional buoyancy, which gives young people more opportunity. It seems to be a complementary relationship rather than one of substitution. So I think it's a very important point. I think in the 70s in Europe, right, in the wake of the oil crisis, retirement ages were reduced and pension access ages were reduced in the belief that the high unemployment that was currently observed there would be relieved for young people by encouraging early retirement, and exactly the opposite occurred. It was a very, very costly set of policies, and I think we don't want to do that again.
Yes, this retirement age, that's the biggest issue in our country right now. When Japan joined OECD back in 1964, Japan's life expectancy was the lowest in the entire OECD, among the OECD countries, but in 10 years' time, Japan's life expectancy became the #1 among OECD countries. But retirement age hasn't changed. It didn't change over that time. Retirement age was 60. So the life expectancy has been improving, but this institutional factor, which is the retirement age, remained unchanged. So in other words, and then recently, government of Japan trying to change the retirement age to a certain extent from 60 to 65. But the problem was that Japan has as a lifetime employment. When you join the employment, they start working, your pay tend to be very low. Then you accept that because you know that the wage will keep on increasing over time. When you retire, you probably get a fairly large amount of money. So that was the idea. But the point is that if you hire an elderly person, then your wage bill is going to be enormous. So the company don't want to hire the older people. So, but because of the shortage of labor, since 1997, the male supply has been, the labor supply has been shrinking. So the companies has to change the earning profiles and start hiring elder persons. But Japan is a very, very tricky country in a way that when they renew at age 60, you have a new contract with the company, but the company don't give them full pay. They just say, okay, we hire you, but the wage will be 50% less. But the Japanese elder person wants to work because we have the longest life expectancy. So this is a big problem. But they keep on working, but the wage is much, much lower than before. Right now, what I'm doing, in fact, in my hotel room here, I'm writing a paper on this health capacity of the Japanese people. Suppose we can get rid of in fact, with Tanya Plea, trying to estimate the health conditions of elder person using J-Star, and suppose we can get rid of all these health problems, then how many people can actually stay in the labor force? And I calculate total supply, potential supply of the workers is so huge, about 6 million. And if that's the case, the Japanese demographic dividend, first dividend, we call it silver dividend, the dividend due to the elderly is the great participation in labor force, is enormous. So, in other words, there's a lot of potential there. So it depends on the policy. You might as well just seize this opportunity by somehow readjusting, I would say adjusting, tweaking the labor market. So that's, I think, it's up to the policy issues. And then the Sonia Please asked me about this, the policies that the government of Japan has been changed and has been introducing in the past 20 years or so. Since 1990, Japanese government started worrying about a low fertility, and we just keep on introducing a bunch of policies like a long-term care insurance, the child care leave, and daycare center, and all these bunch of policies which facilitate the women's labor force participation. But nothing worked. Fertility recovered to a certain extent, not much. But there's one major change. In fact, in 2006, this long-term care, the child care leave, was sort of extended to not the full-time workers, but also the part-time workers. That was a major turning point. Lots of part-time workers, I mean, mostly women, start taking advantage of that. They kept on working, and at the same time, they started giving birth. So fertility started recovering to a certain extent after that. But that's only positive feedback we got so far. But the government, the Prime Minister Abe said that, well, we have to restore the fertility to 1.8. I think that's a sort of wishful thinking. That's totally impossible right now because the Japanese total fertility rate is 1.46, and it's been hanging around 1.4 all this time. And right now, if you look at the entire world, there's no country whatsoever which managed to restore the fertility above 1.5 once it goes down to below 1.5 and stay there for a long time. And Japan went down to below 1.5 in 1995, and since then it's been staying very low level. I mean, looks like there's no hope for Japan to go up to above 1.5. But according to Peter McDonald, I talked to Peter McDonald, and if the Japan could restore the fertility to 1.6, that would be great. But to me, I think the government trying to implement various fertility pro-natalistic policies, but it's very difficult to reverse this fertility trend. I think we discussed this in the first session this morning. I think it is a very big problem. But I think that's about all. Is that it?
Yeah. All right, we'll have the next round of questions. Oh, one over there, yes, at the back. One. Okay, we'll start with you first. Okay.
Thank you. This is Khandakar Sohail Rana. I'm working as a employee of HelpAge, Bangladesh country office. I have two question or comments you can say. That is, one is the retirement age you are talking about, that is 60. I think it's only for the government officials to some extent, but what about the policymakers, businessmen, farmers and other people, like women who are working in the household? It's not the limit for them, only the 60. So maybe it can be a topic to discuss, or maybe you can respond about that things. And the other issue is the policy that is for the taking care of or the maintenance of the parents or grandparents. I'm sure in Bangladesh and in India they have this kind of law, and maybe some other country this kind of policy already have. But is this enough? Because end of the day, if we think about the family values of this subcontinent or this Asia, then end of the day parents will not go for the legal actions against their children's. So this kind of policy, how it could be ensure to take care about the family support to the older people. Thank you so much.
And actually there was a question, I think they're still awaiting answer, that's Usa's question, that when countries compare the spending, like for Thailand, for example, they see the big increase now in public spending because of the social pension. And then they will ask, I think it has been asked, right? Like, why are we spending so much on the consumption part for old people? So this will have political implications. How then can one sort of alleviate or ameliorate, calm the governments down to show them the linkages between the generations? There was a question just now.
Oh, this,
while they are thinking of the answers, I also have one point to make on this is on increasing fertility, because a lot of talk has been taught, but examples in Scandinavian countries have shown that when gender equality is improved, and they have good gender equality, then there's a possibility that fertility can be increased. For example, better childcare, men playing their part, parental leave, paternity leave for men. So a whole package that will really improve gender equality, which in our part of the world, I think, still needs further work on. So that is one measure to raise fertility. But let me come back to you.
Thailand, I think for question, I think about the optimal size or optimality of the public transfers. I think it's very difficult to come up with this specific number or the criteria. I think it depends on the country, it depends on the context. But the Japan, we didn't have the idea about the optimal transfers. When the economy is growing, the government kept on increasing public transfers. When they had a financial crisis, they tried to cut back. But by that time, value changed. So that's the one thing that if the government trying to reduce the public transfers, but maybe the people may not like it. By that time, the value might have changed quite a bit, so they may not accept the government change in the government transfer adjustment. So I would say that I think this is I want you to take it as sort of a take-home message. But I think one thing you can learn about from Japan is that the value could be just very abrupt. And then when the government are trying to introduce some policies, you have to be very careful about the people's feeling about that the new policies. If the government trying to introduce certain policies, they may just didn't like it, didn't respond to it, and the policy is total fiasco. So I would say that if you're a policymaker, I think you have to be really aware of the opinion, the sort of general opinion about the policies, and so on and so forth. I think that's quite important. I think looking back in 1986, we got this abrupt shift in the values. I wasn't aware of that. And then everybody, nobody knew what. And then when we got this result, we got shocked. I thought we made a mistake in survey. Designing and awarding and so on and so forth. But that was real one because later in the subsequent round of survey, the results are consistent. So I'm saying that it's very difficult to perceive the value change among the people, particularly with regard to the care of the elderly persons. I think in the form of government transfers. So I think I want you to call attention that this value change is quite important when it comes to the policy changes or policy options.
So I think one of the questions referred to changing retirement age. I guess there are a couple of points to make generally about increasing retirement age. And when I use that phrase, what I'm actually talking about, I think, is pension access age. So I'm not necessarily imagining a situation where there are institutional requirements that at a particular age you must leave the labor force, but rather that at a particular age you would have access to a pension, right? Or would have access to Social Security, which is a little bit different. So it's a matter of increasing the pension access age. Now, many countries are doing this in the West. Right? There are more than a dozen OECD countries which have either done this or are doing it. Australia has done it, and many other countries have done it as well. An interesting example in a developed world, right? This is now the developed world, of where the opposite has occurred is Norway. And what they did was they had a very complicated social security system, and there were two groups, right? One of them got access at 62, another got access at 67. They made all the access 62, and then they made the benefits actuarially fair, so that if you worked beyond 62, then you got more pension. And this was undertaken in 2010. So we've done analysis of what's happened in the time since, and people continue to work because they're allowed to take their Social Security and work. And although that appears to be very expensive fiscally, right, actually the tax these people pay because they continue to work after 62, right, so the group that was getting this money at 62 now continues to work as well as taking some pension. The tax they pay more than pays for the additional cost of the pension. So you have a situation where if you clearly communicate the benefits of working for longer and you don't have an earnings test which says, well, if you continue to work, we won't give you your pension, right? You just have it at a certain age. People will start taking the pension, but they will continue to work for much longer, and that can be very beneficial because you collect taxes from them. Now, if you're looking at a lower income Asian country, you don't have an effective income tax for many people, and so that same fiscal rescue will not occur. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that people do respond very positively to labor force attachment when there are no impediments to that labor force attachment. And I think that's an important lesson for policy evolution in this region as well as elsewhere.
Thank you, John. I will ask the other John actually to tackle the issue on Thailand and the big increase in public spending for the elderly. Give it a try.
Actually, maybe there's someone in the audience who can answer that much better than I can. I think that the issue of the old age allowance now is under concern from the military dictatorship that's taken over, but I don't know if a decision has been made. Maybe someone else does. Peter, do you?
Okay. Maybe, may I? In terms of the, the pension, I think it's actually also there's representative from the government here regarding the policy on the old age pension in Thailand. Currently, if we look at, absolute, the budget that is allocated for this old age pension is increasing, but in terms of if we look at in comparison to the GDP, we don't see that it will be an issue in the long term. And at the same time, it actually, when I mentioned about the chart of Professor Ogawa, the point that I would like to make is that actually, if you look at the different source of support for older person in Thailand, the public transfer is still very, very small, tiny actually, but mostly coming from the private transfer or the family, and also their all accumulation assets. So they actually, when the government is still very much concerned, but it's still there's lots of room for improvement. That's the point I want to make. And in terms of, if we look especially at the pension itself, the percentage that using for pension, if we compare to other countries, is still very low. And still there is room for improvements as well. So I think this is the message that I want to convey, because I am from Thailand myself.
No. Can I add something on Thailand? So far I know, I think in the first morning session, we found that this net transfer, public net transfer, is in fact negative in case of Thailand and Philippines. That means older people, elderly, they are giving much more in terms of taxes to the government as compared to what they are receiving from the government. And it seems very much true, because in case of Thailand, although they recently universalized the social pension or old age pension, it is still very low, 500 baht a month for a middle income country. And they have increased somewhat. It differs from 500 to 1,000 depending on age. So if you are very much older, then you will get more. Otherwise, you are getting 500 baht. So it seems that it is not that high still.
I just wanted to mention something about the situation in Thailand, though. They started having Social Security, pension as part of Social Security in 1999, but you had to contribute at least 15 years before you got any benefits. Well, that means in 2014, those 15 years were up, and so now people are able to get Social Security payments, and I think that's going to start being quite expensive for the government in the coming years, because the number of people that are entitled to it will be increasing rapidly.
Okay, I think we are about to. Yeah, Peter? Okay. I think we have to wrap this up. I know you have a lot of burning questions that you can accost our experts at lunchtime and sort it out with them. But this has been such a rich discussion. It's impossible to summarize, except to say that I have, from my own view, picked up some very nice, very useful lessons, and that although the NTA is for Japan, I think we have learned a lot of lessons, and in fact, we almost could see the future from what happened in Japan. And I'm very pleased, actually, that we from the discussions, we can find that it can be applicable, that lessons can be learned from other countries, including those that are not as economically successful and developed as yours. I think another useful point we learned was that policy can be very important. And for this meeting, we have a lot of policy makers here. So policy makers, you can, with the right policies, you can change values and attitudes. Although similarly, with the wrong policies, you can also damage your country. So that is very important. And I think the NTA, usually people think like, I mean, the layman would think is very dull, very dry, and very highly technical. But I think from the last session and this session, you can see there's actually a very useful methodological tool. And it can be used for a lot of things, can be used for scenario planning. And very importantly, as I see it, actually it's linked to many of the burning issues of the day, issues of fertility, retirement age, migration. So I think NTA, those countries that do not have it, please go ahead and start doing your NTA. So with that happy and positive note, I thank you all for your attention, and then I look forward to you implementing your NTA and doing the NTA if you haven't done it. Thank you very much.